I'm going to come back to Wesley with the next question here. As a former Ferguson City Council member, former municipal court judge, now county prosecutor, you've got a really unique perspective on the judicial system in the county. One of the key points that Cristina made is that equity data was particularly difficult to get from prosecutors' offices. And this is actually a nationwide phenomenon, including information about for full disclosure, she didn't try to get information from your office, right? Because it was before you were in office and she's in the city. But this is a nationwide phenomenon. Including information about when and why they choose to prosecute and when and why they don't. Question to you, could a revamped judicial system include some transparency requirements? I know this is difficult given the confidential nature of legal cases. However, it seems that at least aggregated data without identifiers or case specifics would be something that could be made available. Can you talk about what that might look like? And I know you're making some efforts at transparency in your office if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think I come into office on the premise that if you are not keeping track and evaluating the data, you can't say what you're doing is successful or not. You have to track the data. And so with respect to a justice system, you don't have a justice system without trust. And if you're not tracking the data, if you don't know what your individual prosecutors are doing on a micro or a macro level, how do you build that trust? And so one thing that we've been doing, now it's been 6 months, so we can't do everything in day one. But what we're looking to do is work with some local universities. We had an organization, which I don't know if I'm at liberty to talk about yet, in town yesterday, where we're working on building some data collection systems so we can evaluate every piece of data from social equity, racial outcomes, what you name it, we want to be able to collect it. Because, you know, I'm not in the business of taking shots at my predecessor, but I think policies are fair, and so I will talk about policies. And the facts of the matter, the limited data that we can find is that, because I agree that we have to look at crime drivers, and if you know me, you know that diversion and alternatives to incarceration are one of my biggest issues. And I'm really proud to say that the data shows that in the 6 months that we've been in office, we've decreased the jail population in the Justice Center by 15%. It's the largest decrease since the early 2000s. That's what the data shows. And as far as the crime drivers, what we know is that the overwhelming majority of people who come in contact with the justice system are in need of substance abuse treatment, mental health treatment. And so last year, St. Louis County had 75 people in their drug treatment program. And I'm going to put that, I'm going to do some comparative analysis here. The Kansas City, which is about 600,000, so a little more than half of our population, had over 550 people in their substance abuse program compared to our 75. The Boot Hill, with a whopping 60,000 residents, had 78 in their drug treatment program. And so when we look at the drivers that determine, you know, criminality, for example, even if it doesn't involve drugs, it often involves when you see carjackings, when you see home burglaries, they're often, if they're not directly drug related, it's someone trying to feed a drug habit. And so if we start treating the nonviolent offenders with addressing the underlying issues, then we're much more likely to prevent them from escalating to the violent crimes. But that starts with the data and collecting the data and being transparent about that data so we can prove that what we're doing is successful.
When it comes to political representation for the African American population, how does the St. Louis region stack up to other metro areas in the country? And I know your research really digs into some of this stuff. So what are the patterns you see emerging on this subject in your national research? Are there kinds of local governmental policies and structures that tend to be associated with adequate representation? What are the relevant factors? And I know we're kind of talking about descriptive representation here. If you've gotten into the substantive representation piece of that question, we'd love to hear about that as well.
Sure, thanks. I will keep this brief, but y'all know I profess for a living. So I will say, I've said most of what I want to say, right? But St. Louis is actually pretty good, right? The city representation. I mean, once Cristina brought in all of the elected official data, obviously it looks better. 50-50 is really good. But overall, I have this data set about the top 100 cities, so that's New York to Birmingham, and plus these other roughly 40 cities, although there's some overlap of these really diverse cities, like the city I grew up in, which the city I grew up in is small, but it ends up being about a quarter black, a quarter white, a quarter Latino, and a quarter Asian. So cities like that, and then cities that aren't very diverse, and it doesn't just mean all white. A city like Hialeah, Florida's on that list because it's majority Latino, right? So it ends up being 134 cities. Whites are overrepresented in those cities, and 104 of them. So that's what it is. So the fact that St. Louis it looks like parity is actually really good. I will say the substantive point is challenging, and I will be brief on this. Let me just say, so I have conducted exit polls in the city of Durham twice now. Exit polls are challenging. There are a lot of data concerns with those data, but again, we don't really know what people are doing until we collect the data. In 2015 and 2017, the city of Durham held municipal elections like many places. And in that time, in 2015, the council returned to a majority black council, which means that blacks are represented there. The city of Durham is like 40% white, 40% black, 15% Latino, 5% Asian. So it looks good. And in 2017, there was some turnover, but it maintained its majority black status, and because a council member was elected mayor, a seat opened up, and so they appointed the first Latina to ever serve in the city. So now Latinos have good representation. The problem is, in my data set, blacks didn't vote for those black candidates. It's negative. Anyone familiar with statistics, you run your regression, and on every model, even for the black candidates that won, it's all negative. So again, we're saying to ourselves, oh my God, look at this descriptive representation. And I'm showing you data that says, ooh, but the black people didn't pick them. The black people wanted other black candidates that were running, but those people didn't win. Right? And so I think right. So this is why I'm really in this like descriptive versus substantive fight for this book, right? Because on the one hand, I'm saying it's important that we're there. And to be fair, I love the council in Durham. I love them very much. But it's not like they're doing, those black people that got elected by basically progressive whites are in there saying like, what can we do to ruin black lives in Durham? That's not true. But if you think that representation matters because you think that people are going to do policies, implement policies and ordinances that benefit you, you don't even want those people, you're already mad, right? So I will say, so in that sense, St. Louis, it looks good, but without the data, I don't know who y'all wanted. Y'all could love every representative or not, right? And so I think this is just to this point of the more information we have, I think we can make better sort of assessments, and accountability is really important.
With reduced representation, how can we ensure black communities aren't ignored in favor of sexier ideas? They talk about sports teams or other projects, but I also want to talk about the fact that according to the city, the police department is massively understaffed. And here we have a model that says that maybe instead of more policing, we can look at using those resources, that resource allocation, to push it upstream, right? More addressing the social determinants of crime, more social services, making sure people don't get there. Is that something that you would be open to, amenable to? What do we need to think about when we think about spending money on police as opposed to spending money on other things?
What are the social issues? Can someone that's not police come in there and help push the social issues, help get the things that are needed in the communities? If you can apply those things and address some of the issues that aren't police related, then maybe the need for as many police isn't as great. Unfortunately, right now, with the way the violence is, the need for police is great because visibility, interactions. If we can get out there and we can make the positive interactions, then we can get the trust factor. If we can get the trust factor, then we can get people to talk to us. If we can get people to talk to us, then we can solve some of the crimes. We can solve some of the assaults, some of the murders, things of that sort. So I think it's 6 in one hand, half dozen the other. It could coexist because there are people out there that aren't law enforcement that can come in, that can impact communities just by the level of resources that they can bring. and they bring a completely different lens and give us additional tools to help the communities that we serve on a day-to-day basis. So if that can happen, then that can free police officers up to do other things. But we've got to get to that point.